Everyone for attending today's TOC webcast. I do my best to try and keep up with all the new tools and techniques for creating great ebooks, and it seems like every week there are a handful of new startups or products out there vying for our attention. Discoverability has quickly become as big a problem here as it is in Apple's App Store. So you're faced with questions like, should I focus on just the big guys and their so-called proven platforms? And how do you decide which of the startups is worth investing time in? Nobody has enough time to do that, so we figured we can help out with a new series of webcasts from Pete Meyers called Digital Bookmaking Tools Roundup. Now, Pete is an industry consultant and the author of an upcoming TOC ebook called Breaking the Page, which is all about digital-first publishing and going beyond today's quick and dirty conversions from print to ebook. The research that Pete has done for Breaking the Page includes analyzing and identifying some of the more interesting digital publishing tools, and those are the foundation for this webcast series. Pete's also the author of a very insightful blog called A New Kind of Book, and I highly recommend everybody on this webcast check out his blog. So you'll find it at newkindofbook.com. And as Yasmina mentioned, if you have any questions for Pete, please post them in the chat window, and I'll keep an eye on chat window traffic and gather as many of those questions as I can to ask Pete either at the end of his presentation or, when possible, at a transition point in his slide deck. So, Pete, thanks for agreeing to do this webcast. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks a lot, Joe. It's really great to be here today. What an amazing time it is to be an ebook writer. You know, device sales are through the roof. Everyone from little kids to grandparents are into digital reading. And booksellers everywhere put out a big welcome mat, making it easy for independent authors and small presses to start selling their stuff. What an awful, painful return to the dark ages time it is to be an ebook writer. Nuisances we haven't had to deal with since the Mesozoic era of pre-desktop publishing are now part of our creative lives, as if writing weren't hard enough. File formats, display size and device anarchy, formatting systems that require engineering degrees, everyone on this webcast knows the drill. I looked at more than 24 digital bookmaking tools in my own small quest to try to sort out where writers and illustrators should look when they're ready to publish. Now, let me make a couple things clear up front. This isn't a Consumer Report style best of evaluation. Instead, it's my attempt to give a tour through a representative sampling of tools, focusing on what felt like the most common types of publishing challenges. I split those up into these categories: mainly text, long-form narrative, simple illustrated books, kids' books with motion and interactivity, books with complex magazine-like interiors, and full-on customization. The tools I'm highlighting today struck me as either noteworthy in the marketplace niche that they fill, they do something no other competitor does, or they seem a bit easier to use, a little more polished than the other options out there. The headline disappointment I'll get out of the way early on. If you're looking for a completely painless way to produce a digital book in 2011, you've tuned into the wrong webcast. But judging by the amount of competition in this field, the choices are only going to get more capable, more user-friendly, who knows, maybe even cheaper. So let me get started. Quick note, I have all these slides and related links ready for download at the end of the webcast, so don't go crazy scribbling. First up, the bare bones, mainly text ebooks that we're all familiar with. The novels, biographies, histories, and so on that are pretty much digital replicas of a print book. No fancy multimedia, just lots and lots of words. The biggest challenge in this category, if you don't want to be an EPUB expert, how can you write and edit a simply formatted book that looks good and that you can sell wherever you want? LeanPub is the first tool I want to look at. This one's especially good if you've got an existing blog and want to use what you've written there as the raw material for a book. What you end up, if you go with these guys, is pretty straightforward. You get a ready-to-sell book in 3 different formats: EPUB, Kindle-compatible Mobi, and PDF. Here, for example, what you're looking at is a book called Startup Lessons Learned. It's available for sale, DRM-free, right on the LeanPub website. Buyers get all those 3 formats that I talked about. And tire kickers can check out the table of contents, and they can download a sample section. Now let's take a quick look on how it works. There's a simple setup page that lets you do things like list the title of the book that you want to publish. You can pick the price that you want to sell it at on EPUB, and you can also write some promotional copy. Here's the first really cool feature that I like about this. If you've got an existing blog that you want to turn into a book, all you need to do is enter the RSS feed. The EPUB system sucks down all your entries. It spits them back out in a ready-to-edit format. And when you're finished pruning and adding, it's really push-button simple to get an EPUB, a MoBI, and a PDF file. Here's a look at what you end up with after entering that RSS info. It's a collection of HTML files, in this case posted to Dropbox. And what you do is back at your computer, you do any editing that you want using an HTML editor like BBEdit or Dreamweaver or whatever you like. You make revisions, you delete unwanted entries, you add in new entries, you write in some continuity, really whatever kind of changes you want. And then you're really ready to go. Now, it is worth mentioning here that if the site of raw HTML, H1 tags, image tags, all that stuff, if it kills your desire to write, EPUB probably isn't the tool for you. Many people find basic HTML easy to learn, but if you're determined to avoid it, wait for the next tool that I'm about to talk about. Back on the EPUB website, you see where you end up once you've made all the edits that you want in your HTML files. It's truly click a button, get 3 formats. Very nice, very easy to use. That's it. I did want to mention cool feature number 2, which is that the system is actually free to use to create those 3 free book formats. You get to do it all for free. You only pay when and if you decide to sell with them. And then it's a pretty attractive 50-cent fee, if you can believe it, and 90% royalties. And by the way, if you want to sell what you've created on EPUB.com and submit your files to the Kindle store, to the Nook store, etc., you're free to do so. Never let it be said that O'Reilly didn't provide a stage for people to talk about other ways to publish that compete with their own ways. So O'Reilly's a great publisher, but this is really an amazing opportunity for people who want to, do some publishing on their own. Finally, if you don't have an existing blog or you don't want to write using blog entries, you can also write in a slightly geekish but a very simple format called Markdown. And there's a bunch of tools out there that let you do that. Or you could just use a blogging tool like WordPress to write your book and then use the EPUB system to publish. EPUB is up and running today, and they're ready to go. Next up is an outfit called Pressbooks. They're similar to EPUB, but there's a couple twists, and one in particular that's going to appeal to people who still use InDesign or who want to use InDesign to publish print books. I'll get to that point in a sec. Pressbooks is, at heart, a custom-rigged, web-based WordPress authoring and editing tool. You write and edit using the very friendly WordPress system. It kind of looks like a stripped-down version of Microsoft Word right in your web browser. And what you see here on the screen that you're looking at is what you end up with when you're ready to publish, a rough or a final draft. You get 3 output options, EPUB, PDF, and that InDesign format that I mentioned, actually, InDesign XML. Now here's a kind of step back into the system, a look at what it looks like. You get a simple-to-edit dashboard that lets you do things like build your book at the level of a table of contents. Essentially, it's like creating an outline where you basically say, let's put a part here, let's put a chapter here, no, let me move stuff around. It's very easy to sort of block out your writing plan. And metadata fans are going to be happy to see on the right side a nice little console that lets you add info like ISBN, keywords, author info. The writing tool itself, like I said, couldn't be simpler. It really is very familiar to anybody who's used WordPress before, and if you haven't used WordPress before, if you've used Microsoft Word, then you'll know how to operate this. That's it. That's Pressbooks. Their pricing is still not completely finalized, but the developer tells me that the basic tools are going to be free to use, and they'll make some charges for optional customization. It's in private beta right now, although they are accepting invitations, and they're targeting end of summer to open up the system to everybody. The final entry in the mainly text category is a tool from a new publisher whose work some of you may already know about. The Adobe specializes in original nonfiction that's longer than a magazine article and shorter than a book. There's two interesting things about them. This new medium-length format could be really appealing for writers who aren't up for book-length projects but want to sink their teeth into something longer than a magazine article. And the authoring system that the folks at the Adobe have built, which I'll preview in a second, lets writers easily add in a bunch of nicely integrated reading extras, things like character summaries, timelines, audio. It's all really, really easy to do. What you're looking at here is the web page for one of the titles they launched with, written by journalist and company co-founder Evan Ratliff. The Adobe publishes their titles on pretty much all the platforms you need to be on if you write this kind of stuff. All the iOS devices, the new Kindle Singles program, that gets you on the Kindle app on all Android devices, so you've got that whole world covered, and they publish to the Nook as well. Now here's a look at Evan's piece, which is a neat story about a Swedish bank robbery. And what you're looking at here is a representative view of how Adobe's titles look on devices, like, for example, the Kindle hardware, where those reading extras can't actually be displayed. So all you get is a plain text, normal-looking piece of writing with a few images interspersed. Now here's that same page as it appears on the Adobe's iPad app, which is what you would publish to if you use the Adobe system. Here you see icons for quick access to those reading extras and other nice additions, like an integrated audio version of this piece. In the first sentence at the top, if the reader forgets who the character is, all they need to do is tap the character's name, and up pops a nice summary window. You get a quick reminder about who this guy is, and just as easy to dismiss it so you can get back to reading the story. I also really like how they designed the overall reading interface. If you don't want all those icons for the extras to appear, you just tap one button, they all go away, and you're reading just what looks like a normal page of text. Now here's a quick look at the authoring tool that they've built and they've begun letting a few people use. They call it Periodic Technology. It's a web-based system that lets authors add in and format all this content, including the extras, and then it handles the creation of all the different formats. So you can publish to the App Store, the Kindle Store, etc. The slide here shows the system, how the system lets writers create those little pop-up character summaries. They're basically just customized sidebars, but you don't have to think about how to design them. You just need to write your material. The Adobe has a few clients using Periodic Technology right now in private beta, and they're targeting early August for a public release.
Hey, Pete, we've got a number of questions for this first batch. Do you mind if we hit a few of them right now before you move on?
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
So back up on EPUB, Tim S. was asking, does quote-unquote mainly text still present problems when it comes to support for running footnotes, endnotes, indexes, etc.?
That is a great question, and I won't even attempt to wing it. I don't know. Here's my instinct would be that stuff starts getting a little bit trickier to do. But I will say that the two guys who run EPUB are extremely responsive. Shoot them a quick email and let them answer. My instinct is that stuff starts getting more complicated to do, but see what they say.
Okay. And Kenny A. also had a question about EPUB, wondering, do they help promote the works as well?
Minimally. I mean, they even point that out in one of their FAQs that really they're just getting started, and they certainly have a lot of social media tools built into those pages that promote each title, like share on Twitter and on Facebook. But you're not signing up if you go with EPUB with a formal publishing operation. This is This is a lean operation, so to speak. So it's really serve yourself when it comes to things like publicity. I think it's really a great tool for somebody who already has a substantial following. If you are somebody, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Next on Pressbooks, Angela was just wondering, can this platform deal with a small amount of tables and charts?
I didn't test out either of those content elements in the test that I ran, but knowing what I've used WordPress, I use it on my own blog, and I've done things with tables, and certainly with images if you're talking about a chart as an image, and it handles those easily. So my instinct is neither of those would be a problem.
Okay. And then just one more, and we'll let you move on here. Mary is wondering on the back on Pressbooks, does Pressbooks require that you actually own InDesign software?
Yes, it would. It would.
Okay. Great. All right. Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
All right. So the next category moves us from the world of mainly text to mainly pictures. I'm calling these simple picture books because they don't do much else other than replicate the kids' books that most of us probably grew up with. You know, great pictures, toddler-friendly words, turn the page. Highlighting something that's stripped down like this may strike some people as kind of heretical, but here's my take. While some of the bells and whistles and the motion and the magic that can be found on lots of iPad kids' books clearly represent the future of this category, I think there's still a huge opportunity for beautifully illustrated books that tell a good, simple story, like Dr. Seuss. He seemed to do okay. And for kids' book designers who want to publish those simple kinds of books and who aren't interested in tackling interactive complexity, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of tools out there. So there's only one tool I'm going to talk about in this category. I'm sure there are others. But what I like about My Storybook, and that's the tool that you're seeing on the screen right now, is its minimalism. You have one responsibility: compose beautiful art. The app, it's an iPad app, lets you import that art that you create, and then you add, position, and stylize text, and then you open it up in iBooks. That's it, to preview it. That's it. That's all you need to do. The program really does nothing more than that. But here's the kicker. You're actually getting a fully formatted EPUB file that you're free to submit to the iBook store or any other reading system capable of showing color EPUB files. In a way, I think of My Storybook as a kind of Pages app for picture ebooks. Very simple to use. So worth keeping it in mind. The outfit behind this app is called Red Jumper Studio. Their domain name is redjumper.net. They haven't announced pricing, but they tell me that they're going to make it attractive to mums and dads, so you can guess where they're from. Beta testing starts next month, and they aim to be in the App Store by August.
Hey, Pete, does this work with photos as well, by the way? That's a question we just got.
Absolutely, yeah.
Terrific.
So for simple picture books, let's move to ones that let you do things like add all the things that we've come to expect: motion, interactivity, the chance to see yet another interpretation of a public domain, public domain kids book classic. If the My Storybook app I just talked about was like the Pages iPad app, the first entry in this category, Composer, from a company called DemiBooks, is more like the Keynote iPad app. Its unique proposition is that for books that are going to appear on the iPad, why not let authors and designers design and arrange things on the iPad itself? It makes sense. Like My Storybook, with Composer, you create all your so-called assets, the art and the audio, on a regular computer, but then you import all that stuff and you lay out and program the motion and interactivity right on the iPad itself. Here you see a look at the design window. It's a basic storyboard-style row of page icons at the bottom of the screen. Inspector-controlled palettes pop up when you want to do things like add movement and interactivity. And while it's going to be possible for anyone with the Composer app to view creations from fellow Composer users, the real appeal for most people listening to this webcast, I think, will be in publishing a real live finished app on the App Store. That's going to require a bit of out-of-app post-processing work. You basically need to transform the file bundle that Composer creates and make it ready for submission to the App Store. And DemiBooks is going to announce details on how all that works as they get closer to a public launch. Their price is still TBD, but the developer tells me they're thinking hundreds, not thousands of dollars. It's currently in a small private beta, and they're targeting opening up that beta and releasing their app on the App Store sometime in August. Next up, MoGlue, which is similar to Composer in that it's a tool that lets you design and publish these kinds of souped-up kids' books. It has a few noteworthy twists. Its software works on your regular computer, either Mac or PC. And what you create there can be published to either iOS or Android devices. And when you're finished designing and creating, you publish your book to a kind of combo store/reader app that MoGlue gives away for free. And consumers then buy your books via an in-app purchase system. Here's a look at the actual desktop design software. Your background page art appears in the main window. You use palettes on the left and right to add additional objects and motion and sound. And when you've got things looking just the way you want, you're basically clicking a button and publishing up to the cloud. And any consumer who has one of the free store reader apps, I'm showing the iPad one here, can then browse through the MoGlue catalog and buy your title. You know, the approach that they're really taking is that rather than having people sort of hunt through the hundreds and hundreds of different book apps that are in the App Store, they're saying come to MoGlue and browse within the app itself that we're creating, the MoGlue app. So it's a little bit of it's a risk. I mean, they need to build their profile big enough to prove that it's an attractive collection of titles, but they are solving potentially the problem of having to wander around the aisles of the App Store trying to figure out where the good kids' books are. Their pricing plan is also TBD, but they're telling me they're circling around something like $500 to publish 10 books a year, and with them also taking about a 20% cut. And that's not finalized, but it sounds like what they're getting close to. They have an open beta that's scheduled to start next month.
So Pete, on MoGlue, one of the questions Gil has asked us is, do you have to upload to the cloud, or can you keep it on your own local drive?
Well, since it's desktop software that you're using to compose with, I would assume, but I can't be 100% sure about this, but I would assume that you'd have those files on your local. You must have them on your desktop. I would be 99% sure of. Certainly, these guys are very responsive, and they'd let you know.
Okay, great, thanks.
The last kind of entry in this category is a tool called Active Reader from an outfit called Tallchair, and that lets you create these really sophisticated motion comic books and other multimedia productions. What you're looking at here is one iPad app called Operation Ajax that used Active Reader. This static screenshot, it really doesn't do justice to what you get when you see this thing playing live, and it's a kind of new hybrid art form where comics meet animation. The core art elements are static, but there's motion within the panels and between the panels. Very, very cool. To make all that good stuff happen, you use the Active Reader tool, which is actually a plugin for another piece of software called Unity, made by another company. It's a high-end game design tool that's available for either the Mac or the PC. And the process begins, as you're seeing right here, when you import the art that you want to use in the book. There's a real kind of 3D-ish look to things, which lets you decide how you want to mix and match the elements on the page. The next essentially the next phase in the production process is a kind of a timeline system that you're seeing here that lets you control the motion that you want to have on each page. There are these so-called keyframing tools for beginners, and they basically let you indicate where you want action to start and stop, and the program figures out the path between those points. Anyone who's an advanced animator can use more sophisticated curve editing tools to really customize the paths that your elements and your objects follow. As far as interactivity goes, what you see here is a flowchart style system. Lets you do things like add touch controls, screen orientation changes. What content do you want to appear when an iPad is rotated from landscape to portrait. You can also do things like integrate databases. As you can see just by looking at this, the learning curve here is a bit higher than some of the other tools, but you still don't have to do any actual programming. Which is big news for people not interested or capable in learning things like Objective-C. When you're finished with what you've created, you use your own developer account to submit to the App Store. And they've also, Talchair has just added Android as an output option, so you can be either on the App Store or in any of the Android markets. The pricing is also still TBD. But they tell me they're leaning towards some kind of subscription fee plus a per-title license. And they currently are in a private beta, although they are accepting and open to submissions. And their target for a public beta is the third quarter of this year.
So, Pete, Sylvia had a question. For these interactive programs, do you need to have your art in layers to get the motion effects?
I'm going to also stick with my 99% sure on this answer. I'm going to say yes. You must have to have it in layers. And I would my 1% clause there would be double check with any of the program developers. But I'm sure you have to have it in layers to really be able to mix and match these things.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I should add to that. You don't necessarily have to have it in layers. You could have separate files that you can mix and match. You could have your bunny as one file and your fox as another file, a fire as another file. But layers obviously are a key way in complex images to let the different parts move independently.
Okay.
The last category I'll talk about today is what I call rich page layout. It's a kind of magazine-style interior design merged with all the things that you'd expect from a modern digital publication. Scrolling text, video, slideshows, web links. The two heavy hitters in this area that I'm sure most people already are familiar with are Adobe and Woodwing. They both their tools operate on top of an InDesign workflow, and they assume you're going to do most of your page design using that program, and their plugins let you sprinkle on multimedia and interactivity. There's an alternative, however, that I wanted to talk about from an established but a smaller competitor called Aquafatus. And that's the last tool that I wanted to talk about in detail today. It's also a plugin. It works with InDesign or Quark. And it gets you publications like the one that you're looking at here, which is an iPad app version of a digital magazine. But its tools could work just as well for a digital book, and they have their system set up for book publishers. What you get, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, simple integration of video that Martini had on the left-hand side is a video. On the right-hand side of this page, you see an RSS feed that's being pulled down live into the magazine to keep the content fresh. And you also get the stuff that you would expect, like scrolling text columns, like you see here on the left side, plus a few things that aren't shown, like images that you can zoom and pan across, and hideable captions, and adding sound. The way that this tool works is you start actually creating outside of your page layout program using a desktop program called the AVE Factory. It's a pretty simple tool. And this is where you pick and you customize the container for your app. And a couple of the available options here include a bookstore if you wanted to sell multiple books or even just a single book. Then you'd move over into InDesign, as you can see here, and you use a plugin called the AVE Interactivity plugin. And that's where you can add all the multimedia goodies that you want to add, the motion and the video and the sound, all that stuff. And then once you have composed and designed everything the way you like it, there's a free preview app that Aquafada has up on the App Store that lets you easily proof your designs on the iPad itself. I should also mention they have a web-based analytics tool that gives you stats on things like how many users watched a video. What you're looking at here is this preview app, and there's one publication in it in the upper left-hand corner. And I wanted to highlight it just for a quick reason. Up to and including this point in the production process, the whole AVE system is free. The plugin is free. You can create all this stuff. You can publish and preview your app for free, which really gives you a very low-cost way to test out changes to any InDesign files that you have to sort of figure out and think through, is there an opportunity here for me to soup up this content? And then if you decide that you're happy with what you've got, then at that point, and you want to sell it, that's when you need to start paying Aquafadas. Their pricing plan is pretty straightforward. Starts at $500 for a book, about $300 for additional titles with volume discounts. The more books that you publish with them, and they don't take a revenue share. They have a public beta that's free and open right now, and they expect to have their first full release up on the App Store in July. So that's it. That's my kind of spotlight on those particular tools. Before I do wrap up and maybe even get to some questions, I did want to include a list of a sampling of just a few of the other tools that I looked at from basic text to most complex. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but I did want everyone to have a full list of some of the other tools that I thought were interesting and promising. Certainly everyone is aware of things like the iOS and the Android SDK, but there's small and growing emerging competitors out there, AppPress and Publish 88 and Interact Builder. QuickShare is a great plugin for Photoshop that lets you add motion and interactivity. And it's really an exciting time because there's so much innovation happening in this world. Now, Joe, I don't know if we have more questions that folks have that you wanted to talk about.
We do, actually, and then some of them are kind of broad. Actually, I have to admit my favorite one is from Jenny, who says maybe Peter can do a follow-up on options not covered today. I know there have been a lot of folks that have pointed out other tools that we didn't include, and frankly, just in the interest of time, we tried to, Pete, I should say, picked some of the more interesting ones for us to talk about today. But as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at turning this into a fairly regular event, probably quarterly. So if there are others you'd like to see covered, let us know. Otherwise, like I said, Pete keeps an eye out there to see what's new and interesting there. So I believe we're going to have our next event in about 3 months, and Pete and I will get our heads together to nail down a date for that. So let me walk through a few of the other questions, though, that came up, Pete, and they're, like I said, they're kind of broad and not necessarily tied to particular tools, but one was, are there any tools available that let you add synchronized text to narration for an iBook?
The periodic technology has a built-in audio element that I'm pretty sure synchronizes. Although when they say synchronize, that can mean a few different things. If it's to the level of tracking, where you've stopped reading, and then immediately be able to pick up at that point in the in the audiobook file. I'm not positive if the periodic technology does that. I do know that people at Enhanced Editions, a UK-based operation, have spent a lot of time perfecting and working on that. So I know that their tools are available. I shouldn't say they're available. I should say their system does what that person is looking for.
Okay, great. Also, a couple people have asked if you've come across any great tools that help with developing HTML5 web app books.
One that I do like is a new one in the App Store. Sorry, I should say in the Mac App Store, called HypeHype, HYPE. It's a pretty kind of normal person-friendly system made by a couple of ex-Apple people for developing HTML content. It's not specifically designed to create books, but certainly the stuff that you create there could be, you could take it and plug it into some kind of book-like offering.
Okay. Next up, which of these tools, if any of them, integrate with XML first workflows and support in-house XML schemes?
Well, the only one I think that's going to come close is Pressbooks. And I think that would get you into the realm of some customized development work from them, which they seem to be interested in doing. But the nice thing is you then, once you get the sort of system and the workflow up and running, you then have a web-based authoring system that potentially lets you go in a lot of different directions. But that's of the tools that I talked about today, I think Pressbooks is the only one.
Okay. Next up, Mary's asking, in looking at the other options, she's interested in mainly text, and if using Kindle Direct or Pubit or Smashwords, would you advise formatting first using InDesign, or what other tool would be good to format before publishing with these companies?
Well, I'm hedging a little bit because there's, it still is a challenge to sort of get all this stuff right. I mean, the thing that I like about operations like LeanPub is that you get an EPUB file, you get a Mobi file that you're free to take and use and submit to any of these. The Kindle Store or the Nook Store. Everyone's definition of what simple is changes. I'm going to be cautious here about this next thing, but I will say I feel like Adobe does not have a hugely long track record early on of doing things like making their output options as reliable as we need them all to be, which specifically I mean like, in InDesign, saying, okay, get me a good EPUB file. But that capability has been around for about, I think, a version and a half now, and from what I hear, it's starting to be much more reliable. So if you're using InDesign and you have 5.5, I think that's probably a pretty reliable tool to stick with. Okay.
Next up, Karen asks, are any of these tools able to include accessibility for people with reading or sight or motor disabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do know that on some of the web-based tools, particularly Pressbooks, which as I mentioned is really WordPress built atop WordPress. There are some accessibility features that are there for people who want to make use of them. Things like alt tags for images. That is the one that sort of caught my eye as sort of having some kind of answer, immediately obvious answer for people who are, interested in really being accessibility friendly. The more visual tools that I looked at, the My Storybook and the Composer and MoGlue, I didn't see anything. I don't want to sell them short there. They may have built in some options, but I didn't see anything that caught my eye about accessibility.
Okay. How about on the textbook front? Any recommendations there, particularly ones that have graphics?
There was a one tool that I looked at a bit that seemed to be spending a fair amount of time on trying to sort of solve the problem of, traditionally formatted textbooks and making them web-based, and that's a Book on Publish is the name of the tool. I think its sort of mission is to really, take the page-centric model of a print textbook, let authors add in things like video and web links, and then get all that stuff up on the web in a way that you could either sell or give away for free. I've spent time talking to a company called Inkling, which a lot of people may be familiar with. They have a very sophisticated textbook publishing program that right now is mainly an iPad app, but they've really rethought what textbooks look like and how they can work, even as they begin from material that began life as a traditional print textbook. And they tell me they're looking at taking the tools that they've developed and making them more broadly available, but they don't have any kind of time frame that they're talking about for that to happen.
Okay. I promise just a couple more here, and then I'll let you off the hot seat. But one of the questions, and I think this just points out the fact that you've identified a lot of very early stage platforms and tools at this point, but one of the audience members pointed out that the tools are charging per book. What about revisions, and over how long of a period? I'm guessing that some of these pricing models are still in a state of flux, and that folks would probably need to check back with these companies individually to see where they settle on pricing. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to make light of this, but I get the feeling there's about 20 companies that are sort of circling each other and waiting for somebody to go first, and then depending on their success, everyone else is going to try to match or meet or beat. But it's clear that there's a lot of movement in the world of pricing. I mean, I will say I did think it was interesting that Aquafadas has sort of planted their flag in the ground and said we don't want to take a cut, or we're not going to take a cut. I think maybe that is going to work for them with a lot of the other competitors. I think it seems to be a trend that they're interested in not all, but many of them taking a cut. And obviously that's a question and a concern for a lot of authors and publishers who are already thinking about the 30% cut that Apple is taking. Seems to me like no, one or two cuts are a deal breaker given the potential size of the market that you get with either the iOS devices or Android devices, but they do start adding up after a while.
Okay. My favorite topic, DRM, and I'm going to rephrase this a little bit here. Is it safe to say that every product you've talked about today has an escape path from DRM, so you're not locked into DRM with them?
Sure. Yes. And well, no. Let me revise my yes. Let's start with EPUB, which is DRM free from the get-go, and the others I can't even sort of make a guess. I do know that the My Storybook app is outputting basic EPUB files. So those are, as far as I know, DRM free. The other developers, my instinct is that everyone that I've talked to for the purposes of this webcast, my instinct is that they're DRM. They're not foes of DRM, but they're interested in letting people do what they want with their files. So I guess I would be a little bit surprised if anybody out there in this tool collection said, we've locked it down and you can't get at it, but you need to double check with them.
Okay, great. Last question for you, and I think this is particularly important as we've seen the Android platform come on strong over the last 18 months. What's your sense about the future of app tools that are cross-platform? So you're not just developing for either Android or Apple, for example. Is that where things are heading?
Yeah, well, people seem to be, definitely seem to be adding that capability. I mean, we see just in the lineup today, Active Reader and MoGlue, just to name two, have added in the capability, Aquafadas as well, to go on both platforms. I have a feeling these are ships that move very slowly because they're so big. It takes a while to add in the ability to publish on these different platforms. I mean, I will say that if you ask me today, what's my guess about the future of tablets? Is it going to look more like PCs or smartphones where there's a very diverse collection of gadget makers out there, or is it going to look more like the iPod where Apple dominates? I think Apple's going to dominate. I really do. I know that's not a very popular answer. I've been wrong before, extremely wrong on these things before. The Barnes & Noble botched the Nook when they initially released it. They got it better, and now it's doing pretty well. So, for example, HP's touchpad, which just launched and really has gotten panned, maybe they'll get that better. Maybe RIM will get their playbook better. Maybe Samsung, will start getting the Galaxy better. But I think if I was a content creator, a writer, an illustrator right now, I wouldn't be worried about being on Android. That's my personal take. I'm sure tons of people would disagree with it, but I would be on the App Store.
Yeah, well, if you're betting on Apple, I'm betting on Android. It's funny. We should do a point counterpoint discussion about this.
Absolutely, and bring in our.
Go ahead.
Sorry, and bring in our old colleague, our current colleague, Lori Patrici, who I made a bet a while ago that Android wasn't going to succeed in the smartphone world, and I was clearly wrong about that, and I have no shame in publicly, letting you know about that. But let's bring her in so she can laugh at me when I make these predictions about Android not being, so. Absolutely.
Okay. Did you have a few more points you wanted to make before I make some closing comments?
I'll just say one quick pitch about this book that I'm writing, called Breaking the Page, and I really sort of do think of it as a kind of a nice complement to the research I do about the tools used to build these books. My book is really a look at how, why, and when digital books should do things that can't be done in print. And so once you've picked a tool, what I'm looking to do in my book is help people think through how do you design words and pictures to create, really good reading experiences. So if you like the tools roundup, then stay tuned for my book, and hopefully that'll prove interesting.
Yeah, related to that too, by the way, I also wanted to mention to folks that we're going to be publishing Pete's book in stages, and the first stage is going to be out in August. So even though the finished product does not come out until a little bit later this year, stay tuned for more details on the first batch, and we're doing it in this serialized publishing format, which we're going to test out, and we're going to play with a really interesting pricing model there. So more details to come, but I too am excited for Pete's book coming out shortly. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pete, for a terrific job today. Thanks for everyone for attending. As Catherine Barrett mentioned in the group chat window, our next TOC webcast will take place on July the 28th at this same time, and it's called The Changing World of Digital Rights with Dana Newman and Jenny Bent, so watch your inbox for those announcements. That concludes today's event, and again, thank you very much for attending.
Joe for their wonderful and informative presentation. We hope our audience has benefited from it, and we thank all of you for attending today. Mark your calendars, folks. As you've heard, our next TOC webcast will be presented on July 28th, and you don't want to miss it. We hope to see you all there. Thank you again for participating. Have a great day. Goodbye.